Welcome to Hitting Home with Mike and Arif. And for you joining us at home, thank you. We're glad you're here. You are in for a treat today. Mike, we've got a great guest.
Oh, I think it's going to be an excellent show for sure.
Little teaser. We have been talking about for months, if not a year, about some of the warning signs that we're seeing in the economy, in the numbers, in some of the trends that we're picking up on, and on some of the things that we have not been seeing in the headlines that
Changing
we believe
times.
we should have been seeing in the headlines far before today. But today we're starting to see them, Mike.
Yeah, and we have someone who knows far better than we do how to speak on this subject.
Absolutely. So let's introduce and welcome Annette Bourassa. Annette, you are an accredited financial counselor. You are a certified cash flow specialist. You are also a chartered professional accountant. You are an authority on the subject matter, and your company is TFSI for Money right here in Barrie and serving Simcoe County surrounding area. Welcome to Hitting Home. We're glad you're here.
Thank you so much for having me today.
Yes, and where were you when I was coming out of school? That's the question first off, because when you go back, in my day at least, back a few years ago, coming out of school, we weren't prepared financially. We didn't get the education on doing your taxes, on financial preparedness, on juggling and managing all your bills and saving for your future. And this is all things that all of us need to know.
Yes, very, very important. The same when I was growing up. School did not prepare us for financial management when we graduated from school. And the scary part is you get out of high school, you apply for college, and right away the banks are giving you credit cards, and people are not necessarily aware of the damage that it can do to your credit score to carry a balance, or that 19.99% interest or 22% interest, and what that does and how many years it'll take to pay that pair of jeans off if you're only making the minimum payments, or that case of beer. Let's say if you go to university and you're enjoying that credit card when you first get it. But these are the choices that people are making because they're not necessarily aware of the consequences. So when we were going to school, yes, now things are changing. I go to a Mastering Money conference every year with CPA Association, and I hear teachers standing up every year, math teachers saying they're changing the curriculum.
That's good
they're
to know.
trying to get cash flow management, budgeting, spending plans into the system so that children are becoming better aware.
This is an interesting conversation, though, and by the way, just to sort of support your story, that was when I went to university in 1989, I think it was. That was my very first experience. I stood at the registration desk, I literally pressed hard and printed for the 3 copies, and as soon as I turned around, I received a welcome package from one of the blue banks that had my very first pre-approved credit card. I think it was for $500. Here's the point.
Just a taste.
Just a taste. Now, fast forward a few decades, or if not a generation, etc. Our parents weren't necessarily right that if you don't have the cash, you shouldn't be buying it because you can't do anything without credit. But it was more a conversation around how to utilize credit as a tool. And I think for me, what's important is that it's fantastic to hear that the teachers are doing this, and I know the Minister of Education and the school boards are really implementing this, but we also have the influence from our parents, so it's also environmental. When we're not at school as students, what is the example that we're picking up subconsciously or consciously from the older generation, and what are they maybe offsetting from what we're learning at school?
So there's the thing, we are being bombarded daily, multiple times a day, by various sources of influence. So we have our parents. Temptations, media, advertisements, our friends. Oh, come on, it's just another $1. The thing I hear a lot is when people are in so much debt, what's another $100? Or we've just come out of a pandemic, and everybody's in the mindset of, it was a hard few years. I deserve a break. I deserve a vacation. I deserve the few little treats in life. It's easy to say, let's order out for dinner. I had a rough day. I'm too tired. We make these choices that add to the detriment of our choices.
And those live for today choices compound, and then tomorrow comes around, and tomorrow is when they may be approaching me as a realtor wanting to buy that first home, and they've created that scenario. And your job, I'm guessing, or part of your job is to prepare people, help people to develop the habits and practices that will enable them to eventually be able to
Yes.
make a major purchase.
Yes, and I think the biggest mistake parents make, our parents, we grew up in the generation that you don't talk about money.
Right.
Yeah.
Money is taboo. I can remember going to the restaurant with my parents, curious as to the receipt and how much it cost. And
It's none of your
that's
business.
none of
yeah.
your business, right? Why? That's got to change. So if we want our children to grow up with the mindset of saving for retirement, saving for a down payment on a house, saving for a car, understanding how to manage your credit cards properly, we need to start conversing with them about that when they're younger.
Yeah.
The conversation at home should be about how much is it costing to manage this home? How much do we have left over at the end of the day? So that our children understand when we say no to ordering pizza or ordering takeout, they understand, oh yeah, no, I know, you made that mortgage payment, you made the property taxes, you're keeping the heat on in the house. We're not having those conversations
No.
and we should be.
I'm going to throw this out there because, okay, we're going to date ourselves continually
Yeah.
here today, it seems like, but you know, it wasn't so long ago that you had literally cash in the bank and you went to the bank and you took out cash and you had it in your wallet, or you were carrying around a checkbook that had that other section in the checkbook where you were literally carrying the one and you were doing the subtraction to decide what was in your account.
Right.
Yeah.
And the
we're not-
balance column.
And the balance column.
Yes.
And we're not doing that anymore. In fact, we tap for everything. We tap our cards. We barely even put in our PIN number. We tap our phone.
Money's elusive.
Is it
Yeah.
any wonder that we actually don't know what's going on until it's too late for some of us?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So we're not keeping track of our spending as we go along. Before we know
Doesn't
it, at
have
the
that impact the
Exactly.
same when you spend, when it's...
Right. When you have that money in your wallet and you take it, oh, I only have 2 more 20s left. Do I want to spend this one? Because I had something else in mind. And that's the example I give my kids all the time. If you look at your bank account as a bucket, and money's going in from your paychecks, and every time you take money out, it can only be spent one way. But you have this goal, and this goal, and this goal, and this goal. But when you take the money out and spend it here, it is no longer available to be spent here, 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 or here. So now all of a sudden we have to get into prioritizing what is truly important. Then we get into the conversation of what are our values. So what's important to you is going to be different than what's important to you because your values are different. But how often are we going through that mindset and thinking when we're using our debit card or our credit card?
Yes.
How important is it that I'm in the drive-thru right now about to spend 20 bucks because I didn't want to make my lunch today or I didn't want to make my breakfast? So we need to become more aware. Every time we're spending our money or tapping, that's money being used up. It's not coming
Sorry,
back.
you're raining on the parade though, Annette. You're ruining the party right now by telling us to be responsible, but it really is that simple, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
is.
And if I may, just to continue the theme of dating ourselves here, you know, when I go back to that high school era for myself, I would say the vast majority of the kids I was sitting in the classroom with had after-school jobs to go to. So we had a sense of our own money, and we knew where it came from. We sweated, did whatever we did to earn that money, washing dishes, waiting tables, or clearing tables. We had a sense of value for that money. There's a whole generation, I don't want to stereotype everybody, but I think we lean a little more towards money for that first part of our lives until we go out there. We don't have that same sense of awareness or appreciation.
We've
of it.
swapped
Yeah.
delayed gratification for delayed responsibility.
Exactly. That's a perfect way to put it.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
can use it.
Yeah, I'm gonna
we'll
use
buy
that.
it now, and then we'll
Love it.
figure out how to pay for it later. Because
Yeah.
we
Exactly.
assume nothing's going to happen. We assume tomorrow's just going to be like today. And the other thing that
Up
we
the
talked about
allowance.
this earlier, but you know, far too many people, for my comfort, are living for today because we have all decided to, you know, live for today. Tomorrow's not guaranteed. Yeah, and
Yeah.
what happens if you're? It may not be guaranteed, but what happens if you're still around
Yeah.
tomorrow and you've got more
Right.
days than you do dollars?
And if I
Right.
might add, all of this is not blame on a certain generation. If it's blame at all, it should be on our generation who enabled and created
I
this.
agree.
Yeah.
I agree completely. Here's the thing. How did we become a society of instant gratification? People don't want to save. They don't want to wait. They want it now. If you take a look at how we are psychologically bombarded with the media and the advertising,
Marketing, yeah.
retail marketing is huge. So all of a sudden, we are considering the basics of purchases as needs versus wants, because that's what we are constantly being told, right? Excuse me. We have 3 needs in life. We need a roof over our head, we need food in our bellies, and we need clothing. Clothing is very highly recommended. So those 3 things.
In our climate, for sure.
In our climate. So do we need that TV right now? Do we need
that bigger TV?
Or the bigger TV, or the stereo system, or upgrading our car, whatever modifications we want to make? Do we need that?
Yeah.
Well, you talked about influence, and we really are influenced. We are bombarded by media. Again, dating ourselves. I think we should have changed the theme of the show to dating ourselves. I wouldn't date.
Back in the day, Mike and Arif.
But, you know, before social media, we didn't have all of these, you know, flash in the pan sort of overnight celebrities and influencers setting some false example, because a lot of them.
Still watching the Kardashians, or
I worked over there. I worked in that scene for 2 decades of my life. Reality TV is not reality. It is still scripted. It is still to get the ratings. It is still to sell the ad revenue, still to sell the ad dollars. But our generation, younger and not as young as maybe we would think, are being influenced and impacted in our decision making by those examples that are being set. So.
Absolutely. You see the stars walking down the streets and they're caught on film carrying certain purses or wearing the certain sunglasses. And all of a sudden our youth think that they need to buy that purse or those sunglasses. We're getting confused with our identity, and people need to go back to that.
And those celebrities were gifted those products and encouraged to show them off, that Gucci watch or that Rolex or the whatever handbag. Yeah.
So I'm going to say this now twice to you, and I don't think I've ever said this to you as long as I've known you, but you're boring me, you're stealing my fun, you're stealing my thunder, you're taking away all my fun, Annette.
Yep, I am.
When we come back from the break, let's actually bring this around and let us know what we could be doing differently.
There is hope.
And does life have to be completely boring? Do you have to steal all my thunder, or is there a good way to do it? And how can we set ourselves up to be able to enjoy a good quality of life and still be responsible in that balance? So when we come back from the break, I've been picking on Annette. When we come back from the break, we're going to continue with Annette Bourassa on setting ourselves up for being responsible and spending a little bit more intentionally. We won't get into that too much yet, but let's talk about some real life scenarios maybe of some examples that you've worked with people and how your guidance and coaching has really turned their lives around. We'll be right back with more from Annette Bourassa from TFSI for Money right after this break. Welcome back to Hitting Home with Mike and Arif, and we are thrilled to have with us today Annette Bourassa. You are the expert on the subject matter today that we're talking about, which is personal finance, household finance, financial responsibility, accredited financial counselor, as I mentioned before, certified cash flow specialist, and chartered professional accountant. Glad to have you on.
Thank you.
You know, we were thinking about it. We were talking in the first segment around sort of the culture and sort of why we find ourselves where we are, and some change, some long overdue but welcome change that's happening certainly in the sort of secondary school level, maybe even earlier in financial literacy.
And in the workforce too.
Absolutely. But we just went through an interesting period that we'll refer to as COVID, we'll refer to it as the pandemic. We're not necessarily out of it. We don't know if we're necessarily going back into it, but we noticed some trends. And one of the top 3 or 4 trends that were noted by people who were collecting this data during that 3-ish year cycle was people either got married, made a baby, got a pet, redid their backyard, something along those lines. And then as we started to come out of the technical pandemic, we've seen people getting rid of their pets, maybe getting divorces, financial marital breakup, marital separation, et cetera. And here we are today, where people are maybe now having to take on 2 households on the same amount of income that they were trying to survive and keep one household together. Talk to us about what you're noticing and what's going on in society today.
Okay, so yes, I do a fair amount of financial divorce work. I'm a financial specialist in divorce matters. What I am noticing is people are struggling with the idea of going from a 2-income household to 1 income. And even though the recipient of spousal support or child support may have, so let's call it 1.5 incomes, they are struggling. So what I'm noticing is during the divorce process, or the financial portion of the divorce process, I am helping crunch numbers, equalization, your division of assets and debts, that sort of thing. Now I'm going to give you a very simple example to give you an idea of what we're dealing with. So you have a couple that have $1 million of net assets. Now $500,000 of the net worth is in the home. Nowadays it's a lot more than that, but let's just say for ease of calculation, $500,000 is the principal residence. Principal residence is tax exempt if you turn around and sell it the day after separation or the day after you sign the papers. Now the other 50% is made up of a cottage, some RSPs, maybe some special artwork, whatever.
Yeah.
Now, you have a person that has the children. They say, I'd like to stay in the home. I have 3 children. We're close to the high school, and they are amicable. So the other spouse says, I would like them to stay in the home with the kids. That's great. I'm very supportive of that idea. Okay, that's super. So from division of assets and debts, that appears fair and equitable. $500,000, great. $500,000, great. But the day after divorce, if everybody was to liquidate their assets, the $500,000 principal residence, as I already said, is tax exempt. The person keeping the other $500,000 is getting a 30% tax hit, possibly even more, depending on their tax bracket, right? Wow. So it's very important when you are looking at divorcing that it's not just a matter of 50-50. It's a matter of taking into consideration the various types of assets and the tax consequences identified with each one. But it doesn't stop there. So as a financial specialist, what we also do is look forward. So I have had some cases where I've said, do you want to keep the home? You're amicable, that's great. It doesn't work. And they're like, what? It doesn't work? No, it doesn't work. Because it's not just asset value, it's cash flow. Cash flow is king. For individuals, business owners, divorcing people, it doesn't matter. Cash flow is king. So you separate, and now you're living off of your income plus any spousal support you receive or child support, but you've got to manage that household now, and you don't have the cash flow to support it. Because being an accountant as well, I look at all of your income, your expenses, all the various cash flow demands. You are going to be bankrupt if you stay in this house for 5 years. But there's creative ways we can look at it. So now we can get really creative and say, you're amicable in all this? Yes, yes, I would like her to stay in the house. Okay, well, she's entitled to spousal support for 12 years. Why don't we shorten the number of years of spousal support? If you have the cash flow to support it, will increase the monthly support to her or him, and you have that obligation for a shorter period of time. Now they can stay in the home until the kids are all done high school. Everybody is as happy as they can be given the situation. It works great. So, but a lot of people, the problem is the professionals are only looking at a small piece of the pie, but they're not trained to look at the other. So my financial specialty designation, what it does is it trains me to look at all of it. People need to consider all that. Cash flow is very, very important. And the reality, you may not be able to stay in that house.
Yeah.
Let's face it, you guys are in the industry, you know, sometimes you have to downsize and you have to live within your means or your needs as opposed to your wants.
A qualification may have only been there when there was 2 people applying, and now there's just 1.
Exactly.
There's another thing that's changing, as well as seeing more and more divorce scenarios. We're seeing a lot of people becoming entrepreneurs now, and sometimes later in life too, not right out of school. Tell us a little bit about some of the people you're dealing with and what you would have to say to them. Maybe those who are already in the thick of it, starting their own business, working from home and that, and then maybe others who are considering a bit of heads up on that.
We'll also tie that back into the pandemic as realities changed for many, many people found themselves either being laid off or not able to survive on the CERB money, or they decided, hey, I'm kind of liking this. I'm going to go turn my side hustle into my main gig. However, there are consequences to going from the implied safety and security and consistency of employment into self-employment, especially if you are thinking about switching to buy a home.
Certainly in the eyes of lenders, yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely, and you hit on it as well. What I was going to mention is during the pandemic, you had a lot of industries that were thriving, right? And now that now that COVID's over, or the pandemic is over, people are restructuring and they're cutting back on staff. So what I'm noticing is we are becoming an entrepreneurial environment where a lot of people are saying, well, I did it as an employee, I know what I'm doing, I'm just going to go out and do it on my own, which is great. I think this economy has thrived on small business for many, many years. Here's the issue. Are they trained and knowledgeable for managing cash flow when they become self-employed? So when you're an employee with a big company, no, there's no guarantee in your job. You can be laid off anytime, but you become used to having that paycheck every 2 weeks. You have a benefit plan. You may be contributing to a pension plan. It's a lot more consistency, and you have the expectations, right?
Yeah. Let me just paint the picture a little bit. I think what I heard you say between the lines was, at what point during that pandemic cycle, that 2 to 3 years where you were sitting and thinking about your future, did you actually go from being an excellent technician in your duty, in carrying out your duty for an employer, to suddenly going and getting your accounting designation, studying finance, getting your BCom so that you could be well prepared to run a business?
Right.
I think that's what I heard you say.
Many more hats, yes.
That's exactly what I said. So the best thing that somebody should do, the first thing they should do, is get themselves an accountant. Somebody that can work with them. If they're thinking of buying an existing business, they need a good valuation done, something that they can rely on. If they're starting up a business, they need somebody that they can trust to advise them on cash flow management along the way. And let's talk about interest rates. We were talking about this earlier. Interest rates are up. So now you go into business and you don't have the savings to self-finance. Now you are financing inventory, you're financing equipment purchases, and now that's a cash flow crunch. And I hear people say it all the time, I'm self-employed, my interest is tax deductible, no problem. But it's cash flow. So people need to get that mindset. Cash flow, taxes are different things.
And deductions only kick in if you have some profit to expense it again, or to write it down from.
Yes.
Right? So,
and it's very common in the first few years you're going to have losses, especially if you're investing in a lot of equipment, a lot of inventory.
sure, you can carry forward.
Exactly. Losses can carry forward and be applied against future income. So there's, the benefit there. But you have to survive the cash flow.
You need a buffer,
in order to get there, right? So So if you are employed, so you brought up a good point, financing. So if you are currently employed and you are planning on becoming self-employed, there's some strategies that you should implement before doing so. First of all, to qualify for financing, it's much, much easier if you have a job, right? So it's great to go to a mortgage broker, arrange that home equity line of credit so that you have that buffer available, get a personal line of credit, arrange any kind of financing that you can qualify for based on your last 2 years of employment income. So now you've got that buffer. But more so, if you can plan a year in advance, tuck that money away, work with a financial planner, see if you can be putting money away every month to prepare.
I just want to put a few things in perspective as well. In the last 12 months, the prime rate has gone up by 400%. Okay, so if you were borrowing money at 1 or 2% a year ago, and your line of credit that you tap into was tied to prime, and now you went from 4 or 5% on a secured line, or maybe 7% on an unsecured line, you're now looking at 12+%. So again, just be mindful of the fact that a line of credit is great, but you still have to make the minimum there or your credit's going to take a hit. So
that's right.
What you talked about, first of all, having a job, maybe start your self-employment journey in the after hours or on the weekends, or find a job that's going to allow you some flexibility, because you're going to need some runway.
That's actually the best way to do it. And that's actually how I became self-employed when I started my accounting practice. I took a job 3 days a week. It was fantastic. I laid in bed at night no fear. I knew my mortgage was covered. I had food on the table because I was a single parent. So I knew all of my financial obligations were met. So I could enjoy the journey of starting to build my practice, right? So a side hustle is the best way to build a business and something you're passionate about. It increases your cash flow. If you're smart with it, you're going to tuck it away, make it grow for you, and now you've got some cushion.
Find out if it works. Find out if that's what you want to do, but still have your job should those things not follow through.
So we're going to have to go to break in just a second now, but what I wanted to sort of tee you up for when we come back from the break is maybe a couple scenarios that you can share with us of where somebody decided to maybe not take the advice, and we hear that all the time. It's, I wish I'd come to you sooner scenarios. So maybe you've got some of those, and maybe you've got some scenarios where someone came to you early and you were able to, maybe we could do a side-by-side of where you're able to guide them through doing it smoothly. We'll give you some time during the break to think about that, but we'll be right back with more of Annette Bourassa on giving us some real good insights on how to manage our finances as we start to go into what really looks like an economic downturn, recession, we'll use the word, and how we can come out the other side relatively unscathed. We'll be right back after this break. Welcome back to Hitting Home with Mike and Arif, and we're here with Annette Bourassa. We're talking about money. We're talking about some surprises that we'd like to help people avoid. And we were most recently talking about people sort of shifting away from employment into self-employment, which is great. It's the economic lifeblood of our country. Here's the thing, Annette. For all the people who are decided, I can do this as well or better, I can do it for myself, I can be in charge of my own life, I can plan my future, it's fantastic. Many of us, though, are finding ourselves at some point coming to maturity on the contract that we had with our bank for the house that we have to still keep over our heads, and we might be getting a pretty ugly renewal notice that's saying we're going from somewhere around 2 to 3% to somewhere around 7-8%, and that's a wake-up call for many. So we're talking about entrepreneurs, we're talking about entrepreneurship. What happens then when you've got to disclose to your bank that you're no longer in that nice safe job that you're in for 10, 20 years and you're self-employed?
Right. So I've spoken to a mortgage broker about that and asked that question, what happens? Do you have to re-qualify? If you stay with the same lender, you don't have to re-qualify, it just renews. Right?
Unless sometimes they may change that policy and decide it's time for an update. And you do have
to disclose whether there's any material change in your situation.
Right. So before that situation comes along, there's a lot of creative ways that you can increase your cash flow, or at least have the plan in the works when you go talk to the bank. So,
but don't just go in blind without doing anything.
No, you got to be prepared. So here's my plan. My income has gone down. I'm self-employed now. You can see first year didn't do so well. Second year I'm improving. I've got a solid business plan. There we go. So that's good. But I know, Mr. Banker, you're concerned about the fact that I may not have the cash flow for my new mortgage payment. I am currently renovating my basement and creating a second suite, or I'm putting a garden suite in the backyard, or I'm bringing in a co-owner, my brother's moving in, we do want to make a change. Yeah, we do want to make a change to the title. He's bringing in some equity. Yeah. So there are things you can do. I've been talking to my kids about that. My son was very, very discouraged, and Mom, how are we ever going to save up a down payment for a house with the way things are, with the interest rates, and with our incomes are not keeping up? And so I've talked to him and said, you're going to have to get creative. So you're going to have to find a friend that you get along with, or a coworker that's also looking, buy a townhouse, buy it together, build up some equity. It turns out him and his sister have that plan, so it's working out very well. But you have to get creative.
Yeah, and just to give people some reassurance out there, if that is your scenario and you do have that coming, At the end of the day, the banks, if you're an existing client, they want to keep you as a client. If you've been a good client, you've met all your payments. And just as you said, if you can show that, yes, there's been some changes, we are a little higher risk at the moment, but we are working towards something and we are still going to be able to make those payments, there's a good chance the bank is not going to send you to the door. They're going to want to continue you on.
I do want to be very mindful that this is a conversation that we must be having with our clients prior to that date.
Yeah,
Yes.
don't just
Scrambling
go in
on
cold.
the date is not a great way to do it. It's in fact a very
With your fingers
ill-advised
crossed,
way of doing it. There are a couple things. You do have to disclose. I mean, at the end of the day, read page 35 of the fine print that you threw out when you threw out your credit card booklet that came with the credit card that told you all the rules and regulations there too. You got to dig that out and read it, because at some point a financial institution is well within its rights to call the mortgage if they find out that we haven't necessarily been transparent with them. Your point still around opportunities to bring in additional revenue, bring somebody else on title, bring in additional income through a legalized rental suite or something like that. Absolutely fair game. Let's have this conversation as well. The banks found out a big wake-up call for themselves in this last year about that product known as the variable rate mortgage, whereby clients were allowed to keep the payment the same even if the rate went up, which meant that they tacked it on to the end of the amortization period. And so now we're talking about some Canadians with, actually it's completely against the law, but the banks put themselves in this position and so did the regulators, that we're at 90-year terms, and you cannot be in a position where at no point are you paying down some principal on your mortgage payment. But with the rates quadrupling for many, that's in fact what happened. So
hopefully a temporary situation.
long story long, though, that the banks are similarly exposed and jeopardized in risk there. So they've got to find out. They don't want to be landlords for 50% of the population. They don't want to be sitting on all that inventory. That would spell a disaster in the financial markets and the housing markets. So we are going to see a period where the regulators are going to come in and say, how are we going to deal with this? So your advice is very sound, actually, to say, how can we bring in someone else on title? How can we bring in some extra income and revenue? And by the way, how can we reset our expectations that we're setting for ourselves around, do I want to buy in one step my dream home today, or how am I going to take steps towards home ownership and building some equity? So, you know, keep going with some scenarios that you've got, though, for us. We talked about what are some scenarios that maybe you want to tie into on how you can guide someone through. Are there any that come to mind?
Yes, the Golden Girls scenario. Do you remember the Golden Girls?
I do, yeah.
That show? It was awesome. So a couple of friends of mine and I, we were all separated, single parents, and we all said, you know what? When our kids move out of the house, instead of us having 3 individual homes and then we visit each other, Golden Girls. We'll sell our homes, we'll move in together, and we've got companionship. We have a third of the bills, and we can enjoy some travel.
Yeah,
so
safety aspect, you can everybody keeping an eye on each other. Yeah.
There is a large community of people that are adult and single, so join forces.
Yeah.
I would actually love to create a website where it's an association that, you know, gets roommates together and just coordinates all that.
Yeah.
I don't have time for that.
It's funny, though, that you say that,
idea.
Mike. We had a guest on the show a number of years ago, and they were related to carp. And I will tell you, and sorry, I know you got something you want to say, there was a period of time where you needed to have a wet signature, actual ink on a piece of paper, and the bank said, no electronic signature, we don't care, we're not doing it. During the pandemic, suddenly they decided they're going to do it. This is one of those scenarios, Annette, I'm pretty sure they might have been a little bit ahead of their time a few years back when they were saying this. Being tenants in common versus joint tenancy allows you to take title to a home where you can come in with different down payments, you can come in with different equity, and you can share it or split it up legally in a fair and equitable way that is representative of your investment. I do see that on the horizon,
we do
Mike.
see that.
What are you seeing?
And at the other end of that scenario too, we're seeing people coming in to buy their first homes, and a young couple who, or maybe a young individual saying, I can't afford, I certainly want to get into the market and own and start, you know, accruing some equity in a home rather than paying rent. I can't do it on my own right now. I just don't qualify. I have a friend, I have 2 friends. Let's do this for a short period. And I've worked with a lot of friends whose younger kids, you know, right out of college, university, they went into that scenario. And 5 years later, they were in a far better financial position. They were able to step away from that property and then buy their individual homes. They had the down payment. They had the ability at that point to carry a home, but just to get their foot in the door, thinking creatively, and the security of having 2, maybe 3 people, maybe more, involved in a scenario. But it's not something you want to enter into lightly either. You want to make sure you're doing it with your lawyers and making sure you're covering all the bases to do it properly.
Yes, and what's also very common now is parents. So a lot of parents are selling their homes and going into a home with their kids. So they're taking their equity and creating a big enough down payment that now the kids can manage the mortgage payment, and the parents now know that they've got a place to live until they no longer need a place. So. Yeah.
And along those lines, talking about our parents and this boomer generation, which was the biggest living generation for the longest time. I think the millennial generation is now a bit larger, but they're hitting into their twilight years. And there's a statistic, and I've referenced it here before, and I don't know the exact numbers or timelines, but somewhere between 2010 and 2020, 2025, it's expected over $1 trillion of wealth will be passed down from one generation to the next in Canada. We're in the midst of that happening. So let's talk a little bit about estates and about whichever side you're on the receiving end, or maybe you're a parent and you want to be prepared. You don't want to just leave things to chance when you pass and there's an estate to pass down. Anything quickly we can talk about on those things, just some good advice.
I have a few things I want to touch on there. So what I hear a lot of people saying when I'm talking to them about cash flow planning is, well, I'm going to inherit a lot of money. Are you really? Like, we're living longer.
Your parents.
Our
parents are going to the casino a lot more.
Exactly, and they're also traveling and they're enjoying life. It's their money to enjoy. So how much are you really going to inherit? And I don't believe that is something we should rely on when we're planning for our own retirement, because if they do go into a nursing home, if they do require medication that's not necessarily covered by our health care, it's going to eat away at the capital. And it can get eaten away quite quickly when you take a look at the cost of some of these residences. And let's not forget, when we are doing our research, the amount of money, if it's $6,000, $7,000, $8,000 a month, that's after taxes. That's the parent's disposable income that's going towards that fee. So that's one point I want to make up. The other point is, if you are going to inherit money, don't wait. Get a financial planner before. So if you do find out that your parent is terminally ill and you know the will and you know an idea of the amount of money, don't wait. Get that financial planner in place right away, because they can implement some tax strategies for you.
And also, what's the present value of money as opposed to waiting an extra 10 years? So what is the tool or the utility that can
exactly. And then being on the giving side. So, and another thing you got to think about too is our parents may have donated a fair amount of money that we may find out in the will. So you may think you're going to inherit $3 million, but they may have donated 2 of it to their favorite cause, right? So you really do need to know the nitty-gritties before you can plan. The other thing too is on being a parent with kids and planning for my retirement. So there are things that you need to think about. And again, a financial planner can help you with this. How much should we be putting into our RSPs? So if we think about it, the idea behind it is, say we're in a 40% tax bracket, you make a $10,000 RSP contribution, you get that tax reduction, the reduction in the tax payable at your 40%. But if you are retiring, so the idea is, and then when you retire, you're only at that 20%. So you have that spread, which you're going to get a savings on. But what if you're contributing now at 25%, and then you take it out in retirement at 20%? Now you've got inflation eating away at it. There's a cap. So I've met with my financial planner. We've talked about that. Where is the limit? So that's something that you really should plan ahead for.
Yeah, absolutely. We do have to go to break. Great information. When we come back from break, actually, we do want to talk about that thing that we teased earlier called intentional spending.
My favorite term.
Your favorite term. So we'll come back and we'll talk about that. You'll let us know what it is, and we'll let you think on that, what that might be. But the other element is, as well, back to your comment on cohabitating with the Golden Girls. let's talk about the difference between what you might be spending in a retirement home versus 4 or 5 people coming together and sharing the cost of the PSW in-house. With that in mind, we do have to go to break. We'll be right back with more advice, guidance, things to think about at home that may be impacting you in your life as we enter into a different climate economically, and what you can do to best prepare yourself. We'll be back with more from Annette Bourassa right after this break.
Welcome back to Hitting Home with Mike and Arif, and we're here with Annette Bourassa from TFSI for Money. We're having a great conversation here. I'm learning a lot. I'm sure everybody at home's learning a lot from this. And just to put a bow on what we talked about before the break, talking about wills and estates and passing your inheritance on, here's a question I would have for you with regards to gifting. Now, it's a tax-free thing to gift an amount of money to a family member. Do you have any thoughts with regards to doing that, perhaps to enable another family member to buy that first home or continue in a home that they're in, versus holding that money back and putting it into the estate where it may be subject to taxes and that? Any thoughts on that?
Right, very, very good point. I have 2 thoughts on that. Number one, is a great idea. The power of the dollar is much more now than it will be 10 or 15 years from now. Housing prices are just going to increase in the next 10 years. So better bang for the buck for the parent to gift that down payment now. It gets them into the home. But another thing to consider is the parent needs to be well aware of making sure that they don't decrease their capital too much, because they don't want to become a burden on that said child if they give them too much and then, oh, I'm living longer than I expected and now I need a nursing home and my money is in your house. So there is a balance.
Yeah. So, and it's interesting because as we were talking about as well, cohabitating and multi-generational families or friends or even strangers getting together who share a common goal. And that's really what it comes down to. It's you're not doing it without thought. You're not doing it randomly. You're doing it with a really solid plan in place. Delaying moving into a nursing care facility or retirement facility as long as it's safe for the senior to do so. They're still mobile. They're still in relative good health. Can be a strategy, and I believe that there are even some programs in place that can assist a household age in place and outfit the home with maybe a ramp or some safety bars in the bathroom facilities, etc. So again, transferring title and going in on title together is a strategy. And we also talked about your Golden Girl scenario about sharing in the cost of some care there. Are we, even as a province, prepared for this influx, as you talked about, of generational transition into senior care requirement? Or is it actually a strategy that the province and planners and the communities are planning for to have people stay in their homes longer? What are your senses there?
I really think the government is encouraging people to take care of their family at home through tax credits. We have caregiver tax credits encouraging people to take care of their loved ones. I love the idea of the Golden Girls plan because it's not just financial, it's emotional, it's mental, it's physical. So they don't have enough staff to take every individual out for a walk. They don't have enough staff to keep an eye on how much did that person eat of their dinner. Are they eating enough? What's their dietary intake? They don't have that kind of care. If you have 3 or 4 people living in a home, you can afford to hire a PSW full time. Somebody can be in there, take you out for walks, make sure you're eating, do your laundry.
And bear this in mind, when you put someone into a care facility, you, as part of the fee for that room and the meal that you're paying for, you're paying a premium. You're paying a premium for the bureaucracy, you're paying a premium for the overhead, you're paying a premium for the common elements, the maintenance and facilities, and not all that money is going to the nurse or the PSW who's taking care of you. So if you were to actually find a PSW, maybe not through an agency, maybe through an agency, that's a different conversation, more of that money might actually go to the person who's taking care of you, and you might be able to build that relationship as well.
Yeah.
Question for you,
Just
though.
as a sidebar
As
here,
a
before
sidebar.
we move on
Yeah.
here, and I'm a little miffed here because we've made reference many times to the Golden Girl scenario. No one ever talks about the Golden Boys. And they're going to need that assistance more
Archie
than ever.
Bunker. That came to mind.
Especially with meal preparation and
me.
housekeeping, for sure.
But a question for you about the fact that if you go in as a tenant in common into a Golden Girl scenario, we should also mention that you can gift that portion to your heirs.
Yeah.
So let's say they're 4 or 5, that 25% proportional to your investment that you went in on the down payment with, but contractually you can either sell that interest right or you can gift that interest right. Is there anything that we need to know about if we were to consider that?
That is a really, really good point for divorcing or remarrying people to take into consideration as well. So tenants in common is awesome because it is your asset. Your portion is in your will. So I pass away, the co-owner has to buy my estate for my share of the house, which protects my children. Same with remarrying. So a lot of couples now are going into marriages and they have children, they have their own assets, they have their own money, they're in their 50s, they're going into this house. Tenants in common is perfect because now I know my children are protected. I haven't given their share of the their estate away, right? So tenants in common is ideal, and I think there's more and more a lot of flexibility coming up in different options.
It's
right?
a conversation had more and more with realtors, and any realtors watching should be well versed on this when dealing with their clients.
We're going to see more of
scenarios.
it for sure,
Yeah.
Mike. We don't want to deprive you of that favorite subject of yours that we want to get into in the limited time that we have left with you. What in the world is intentional spending and how can I apply it in my life?
Okay, intentional spending, it is my favorite term. And what I love about it is about the mindset. And it can be applied to any age, to any industry, to any business. It doesn't matter. If you're a human being, you can apply intentional spending. And all it is really becoming very clear on what your core values are. So if you know what your core values are and you keep it consciously aware, then every time you take out your debit card, your credit card, any money, you need to ask yourself, why am I making this purchase? What purpose is it serving in my life? Is it bringing me joy? Is it in line with my core value system?
Yeah.
And if we take the time to ask that question, we're going to modify our spending. And we are going to focus it in areas that it's going to bring us joy. And I'm not talking about cut out fast food. If that brings you joy, then by all means.
You're okay then.
You're not a nutritionist, you're not a doctor, you're not a cardiologist. We're just going to make that very clear.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So all I'm saying is from a cash flow perspective,
Yeah.
but keeping in mind, if you spend it here, it's not available to be spent
Yeah.
here, here, or here.
Yeah.
So being intentional, but I love the word intentional because when we become intentional in our spending, we become very disciplined. When we become disciplined in one aspect of our life, our brains are not going to compartmentalize. We're not going to be disciplined with our spending, but not be disciplined in our job integrity, our work value, our parenting. When we become disciplined, we become disciplined. And that's going to flow into all aspects of our life. So I love intentional spending for that reason.
Another question one might ask is with a potential purchase, does this serve my needs or wants today? Obviously it does if you're tempted, but the bigger questions, what does it serve tomorrow or next week? And the answer to that question may influence whether or not that purchase is worthwhile or not.
This is interesting because I think many of us would agree we're our own worst enemies in some way, shape, or form, right?
Instant gratification.
I have to know myself. But here's the thing. When I make that purchase that is not a need, and it is not part of my plan for tomorrow, and I do it on credit, I'm not paying the sticker price for it. I'm paying a compounded interest effect as long as I'm paying just the minimum and not paying off my balance at the end of the month. I might be paying for that for 30 years, and that item may well be in the landfill, and I'm still paying for it. People do this with rolling over their cars. Oh, I got an offer. The dealership asked me to sell them my car, and they're rolling in my balance into the new payment. You're now paying for 2 cars, and you only got one, right? But so how can we discipline ourselves, and who do we reach out to? Who's going to hold us accountable if we're not strong enough? And I hate to say it, there are some of us who are like, I know, but I'm not disciplined enough. What's the first step?
Get a coach.
Get a money coach.
Oh, I almost teed you up for that.
Yeah. So I want to clarify, there is a little bit of a difference between a money coach and an accredited financial counselor. So when I'm coaching people, what I'm doing is, all right, what are your goals? All right, we've got that clearly defined. Well, first of all, we start working on rethinking your money mindset. Rethink the purpose that money serves in your life. Rethink what your identity. Too many people, money and what money buys is our identity and our self-worth. So sometimes we need to shift that money mindset. That's more in the financial counseling. The money coaching is, you have financial goals, let's get them documented, let's put together a budget, a spending plan. And by the way, budgets are for a specific purpose. Budgets are, I'm saving to buy a car, a vacation, a home, repair. A spending plan is what we use to live on day to day. People need to have that carefree, unjudgmental spending. So you build that into the spending plan. Savings are built in.
Yeah.
Exactly. So all of that, so you work with somebody that gets to know what your goals are, and they coach you, they mentor you, an accountability partner, that could be the coach or your partner. Financial counseling gets more into, you're struggling, you're stuck, there's triggers, you end up at the mall to satisfy an internal need, getting into the deeper rooted issues, we spend time on that. So start with a money coach.
Right.
And what would you say to the person who maybe has developed the mindset that I'm just too far gone? My financial situation is far beyond what any assistance is going to help me with. Do you have any advice for them?
Don't get so disheartened. You're never too far gone. There are some solutions.
Yeah.
There's many different strategies to approach debt. So the first thing is take the first step to seek some guidance and help, but you've got to be willing to do the work.
We have all been in a place where we thought it's too late for us, and look, we're still here. Those of us who are still here. That is a great topic for another conversation as well. We're almost out of time. For people who are in this position, though, they've got to find somebody. You got to reach out and speak to somebody, whether it's Annette or somebody else. Find somebody you trust. But for people who do want to find you, it's TFSI, the number 4 money.com. We can find you. We can look up. By the way, we've been saying TFSI all day or all show, and that's actually rethink, refocus, re-strategize, and implement. And I think it's important that people know that there is sort of an intention behind even the acronym there. But the first place to start is to have the conversation. It's not too late. I think, Mike, parting words. I think we both have, as you said earlier, Mike, learned a ton from you today.
Yes, for sure.
Very rewarding. Glad to have you on.
Yeah,
Any final
can't
thoughts?
wait to have you back, and we'll have a whole set of questions for you then to add to the ones we're contemplating now. Thank you very much. Again, we've learned a lot here, and financial strategizing and thinking forward, not just hindsight, is such good advice with regards to our finances.
Well, thank you so much for having me today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Glad, and thanks to Rogers for giving us this platform to share with you. We'll see you again on Hitting Home with Mike and Arif next time.